This Shabbos is also Shabbos Chazak, as we conclude the fourth of the five Sforim Chumash Bamidbar, and we get ready to begin next week Chumash Dvorim. But before we do, we conclude with Chazak v'nis Chazek on Chumash Bamidbar. For today, I want to learn with you for a few minutes about one of the mitzvahs that the Torah talks about in the last Parsha, in Parshas Massei, towards the end of the Parsha. So this, of course, is known as the famous mitzvah of Ir Miklot, or in English referred to as the cities of refuge. Now, what happened in the biblical times, it happened in the days when the Yidden lived in Eretz Yisrael, is that if a person, Rahman al-Islam, murdered someone else, actually, the Gemara explains, either intentionally murdered them or unintentionally. Either way, the first thing you would have to do is you would have to run to the Ir Miklot, to the city of refuge. And there in the Ir Miklot, in the city of refuge, you were safe from the Goyal Hadam, from the relatives of the victim, the individual whom you had murdered. Again, either intentionally or unintentionally. You would be safe there until Bezdin the high court, would send a summons for you, and they would remove you from the Ir Miklot so that you would have your day in court. And there in the Bezdin, they would decide whether you had committed this murder intentionally or whether you had committed the murder unintentionally. If the murder was done intentionally, then under the right circumstances, if there were witnesses and warning, etc., the person would face capital punishment. If it was determined by Bezdin that the murder was done unintentionally, the person killed B'loi Eva, the Pasuk says, meaning to say they didn't hunt them, they didn't intentionally kill them, it happened by mistake. If it happened by mistake, then your punishment, the consequence was that you would go back to the Ir Miklot, you would go back to the city of refuge and remain there until the death of the Kohen Gadol. So if you want to follow along, I'm here in Perek Lamed Hey, Pasuk Chof Ches, where again the Torah is talking about an individual who had committed a murder, and it was determined by the Bezdin that that this Jew had committed the murder unintentionally, and so they go back to the city of refuge. Perek Lamed Hey, Pasuk Chof Ches. Ki be'ir miklotoi yeshev. The Pasuk says that I'm getting a message that some people are not being let in to the Shiur. No, it looks like everybody who wants to be in is in. The pasuk says, "Ki be'ir miklota yeshev." He, the person who murdered unintentionally, must live in the city of refuge. Ad mois hakohen hagadol, until the death of the Kohen Gadol. Ba'achari mois hakohen hagadol, and after the death of the Kohen Gadol, Yoshuv haroitzeach al eretz achuzasei, the murderer, the unintentional murderer, may return to the land of his inheritance, may return to wherever it was that he lived beforehand in Eretz Yisrael, maybe the Los Angeles section or something like that. That would be his sentence. So again, in general, a person who killed intentionally would face potential capital punishment in the hands of Bezdin. A person who was determined by Bezdin to have killed unintentionally, his punishment was that he had to live in the city of refuge. How long did he have to live in the city of refuge? The pasuk says, until the death of the Kohen Gadol. If he ventured out of the city of refuge before the death of the Kohen Gadol, and he was discovered by the Goyal Hadam, he was discovered by the relative of the victim, the relative of the victim was either allowed to kill him or even obligated to kill him. In fact, if anybody else killed him outside the city of refuge, they would also not be held liable in a regular way for killing somebody, because the Torah says he lives in the city of refuge and he has to stay there until the death of the Kohen Gadol. Now, of course, Rashi quotes from the Gemara, where the obvious question here is, what's the Kohen Gadol got to do with this? And what's, this business that the guy has to stay in the city of refuge until the Kohen Gadol dies? Was hat the Kohen Gadol gesündigt? What did the Kohen Gadol do wrong? That the person stays there until the Kohen Gadol. What b'chal does the Kohen Gadol have to do with it? So Rashi gives two explanations. We're going to focus today on the second explanation. Rashi says, Rashi says, in a way, the Kohen Gadol is kind of responsible, kind of liable. And that's why the individual can only leave the Ir Miklat when the Kohen Gadol dies. Why? Because the Kohen Gadol should have davened that this type of a takola, that this type of a calamity should not have taken place during his lifetime. And meaning that one Jew should not unintentionally murder another Jew during the lifetime of the Kohen Gadol. And the fact that it happened means that the Kohen Gadol, in Yiddish we say, he didn't sufficiently daven, he didn't daven enough. And therefore, in that sense, he's held responsible. He's held responsible, and so the person can only leave the city of refuge once the Kohen Gadol dies. This is what Rashi says. The Gemara goes so far as to say very famously that the mothers of the Kohanim Gedolim would go around every day to the cities of refuge. Now, I don't know exactly how they managed this, because there were 48 cities in Eretz Yisrael where people could go, murderers could go and find refuge in these cities. 6 of them were designated as Ari Miklat. The other 42 were the cities where the Levium lived, which were also kosher for an unintentional murder to find refuge. So there were 48 cities. I'm not exactly sure how the mothers of the Kohanim Gedolim managed their time. Did they go to all 48 cities every day? Would have kept them pretty busy. Did they go to some cities some day, other cities another day? The details of this I don't know. The Mishnah doesn't say. But the Mishnah does make it clear that the mothers of the Kohanim Gedolim would make their rounds in the cities of refuge every day. And they would provide for these murderers, they would provide for them, in the words of the Mishnah, michye uksus. They would give them food and clothing. Why? Because the mothers of the Kohanim Gedolim didn't want these murderers who were stuck in the Ir Miklat to sit there and daven and say, Rebbeinu Shalom, let the Kohen Gadol die. Is our local Kohen Gadol here on today? Because if he is, we want to wish him Arichas Yomim V'Shanim Tovos. We're going to talk today about the death of the Kohen Gadol. It should be a segula for Arichas Yomim for our Shara Tefillah Kohen Gadol, if he's on. If he's not on, it should also be a segula for Arichas Yomim V'Shanim Tovos. But the mother says the Mishnah of the Kohanim Gedolim would go around and feed and provide clothing for these murderers. They didn't want them to die. They didn't want them to daven that their sons should die. Because, again, the simple meaning is that these people are sitting, their life is on hold. They're waiting for the Kohen Gadol to die so they can go back to their regular life. So the mothers were concerned that they would daven that the Kohen Gadol should daven a bissel schnell, he should die a bissel, should die a little faster, so that they could go back to their regular life. So the mothers would provide them with food and clothing. They hoped they had a special budget for this, so that all the murderers waiting for the Kohen Gadol to die so they can go home should not daven that their sons, that the Kohen Gadol should die, that their sons, these mothers' sons should die, so that they can leave and go home. They would bribe them so that they shouldn't daven for this. Or in the Gemara, there's another version of this, that they wouldn't just bribe them that they shouldn't daven that the Kohanim Gedolim should die. They would bribe them that they should daven that the Kohen Gadol should live. So this way, the Kohen Gadol would have Arichas Yomim V'Shanim Tovos. Okay, this part is very famous. But then there is a very interesting din. In typical Gemara fashion, the Gemara asks like this: what happens if the Kohen Gadol dies right before the Beis Din rules that this person has to go back to the Kohen Gadol, has to go back to the Ir Miklat? So what happens? In other words, what happens if you have a Kohen Gadol, he's working in the Beis Hamikdash, and the Kohen Gadol dies? Right after he dies, Beis Din rules that the particular individual has to go to the city of refuge and live there until the death of the Kohen Gadol. What's the problem? The problem is that at the time that Beis Din gave this ruling, there was no Kohen Gadol. They had not appointed another Kohen Gadol to take the place of the previous Kohen Gadol. Mishenigmar dinoi, imat shaloi nigmar dinoi, meis Kohen Gadol. So now what happens? So the Mishnah says like this. If they appointed another Kohen Gadol before Beis Din sends this unintentional murderer to the Ir Miklat, then he has to wait for the new Kohen Gadol to die. But what if there was no Kohen Gadol? What if there was no Kohen Gadol at the time that he was sentenced to live in the city of refuge? If there was no Kohen Gadol at that time, he stays in the city of refuge forever. He stays in the Ir Miklat forever. Or what if the Kohen Gadol himself killed someone? Then the Kohen Gadol himself will have to stay in the Ir Miklat forever. What if somebody killed a Kohen Gadol? In all these cases, you have to stay in the Ir Miklat forever. Okay. Final scenario. What happens if a Kohen Gadol is appointed after the individual kills, but before the Beis Din sentences him to the Ir Miklat? So in other words, Ruvain was Kohen Gadol number one. Ruvain was Kohen Gadol for 20 years. And during his lifetime, somebody killed by mistake. Ruvain died. The Kohen Gadol passed on. Shimon, the new Kohen Gadol, was appointed, and he was appointed as the next Kohen Gadol. After he was appointed, 5 minutes after he was in office, Beis Din sentences this man who had killed previously to live in the city of refuge. What happens to this person? Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, he has to stay in the city of refuge until the new Kohen Gadol dies. That's the thing. Even though this Kohen Gadol was not Kohen Gadol at the time that he killed by accident, he was only Kohen Gadol at the time of his sentencing. Nevertheless, the Gemara says, since this individual, Shimon, was the Kohen Gadol at the time of his sentencing, he stays in the Ir Miklat until the death of Shimon the Kohen Gadol, the second Kohen Gadol, who was Kohen Gadol at the time of the sentencing. Frek the Gemara asks in Masech Mattos, Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. Frek the Gemara, quote, "My havalei lemevad." What should this Kohen Gadol have done? Let's try to explain the question. Under normal circumstances, when we say a person stays in the city of refuge until the death of the Kohen Gadol, we just explained the reason for that is that the Kohen Gadol is semi-responsible for what happened. We're basically telling the Kohen Gadol, look, you should have davened that this kind of stuff should never have happened on your watch. No, you didn't daven that it should never happen on your watch, so you're semi-responsible. So the murderer will stay, the unintentional murderer will stay in the Ir Miklat until the death of the Kohen Gadol. But in this case, we're talking about a scenario where the person, the Yid, becomes a Kohen Gadol after the murder already happened. He becomes the Kohen Gadol right before the sentencing. And yet we're still saying that the person who was sentenced has to stay in the Ir Miklat until the death of this new Kohen Gadol. Frek the Gemara, my havalei lemevad. What could he have done? There's no way that he could have davened to prevent this murder, because this murder didn't happen on his watch. It happened on the watch of a previous Kohen Gadol, and that Kohen Gadol is already dead. The only thing that did happen on his watch is the sentencing, is the judgment. So what do you want from him if the story happened before he came around? My havalei lemevad, what should he have done? Answers the Gemara, quote, Hoyoloi levakesh rachamim, sheyigmor dinoi lizchus. He, the Kohen Gadol, should have davened that this person who was tried for unintentional murder, that the psak din, that the ruling in his case should have been that he is in fact innocent, that he is in fact not worthy, that he is in fact not deserving of the consequence of remaining in the Kohen Gadol, in the Ir Miklat. V'loi bikesh, and he didn't daven for this. So true, on his watch, the murder did not take place, but on his watch, some Jew was sentenced to remain in the city of refuge for an unintentional murder. He should have davened that this person's psak din, that this person's judgment should have ended favorably, and he shouldn't have had to go to the city of refuge. V'loi bikesh, and he didn't daven for that. And so yes, no murder happened on his watch, but a sentencing happened on his watch. He should have davened that the sentencing should have ended differently, and he didn't. For this, he is responsible, and for that reason, the murderer stays in the Ir Miklat until the death of this Kohen Gadol, who was Kohen Gadol during the time of his sentencing. Again, in the words of the Gemara, He, the Kohen Gadol, should have davened that the person should have been judged favorably. And he didn't daven for it, and that's why he is also semi-responsible for what happened. And so the person remains in the Ir Miklot until the death of this new Kohen Gadol. This is the end of the statement of the Gemara that I'm going to quote today. Now, very briefly, the commentaries have a very difficult time understanding this passage of the Gemara. What in heaven's name does the Gemara mean? He should have davened that the Bezdin should paskin that the person doesn't belong in the city of refuge. Why is that something to daven for? If the person killed unintentionally, if in fact he is guilty of the crime, then he needs to do the time. If in fact he did do what it is that he's being charged to do, if in fact he's Chai of Golus, he belongs in the city of refuge, then they should paskin that he should go to the city of refuge. Somebody's asking, how was the Kohen Gadol chosen? How would he know to daven? So there was a process. That's actually a very good question. There was a process as to how the Kohen Gadol was chosen. It's a very elaborate process. Be it as it may, he knew that he was, how they talk about in politics. They talk about the first day in office, right? So from the first day in office, he should have davened. The Gemara says that somewhere out there, anybody who's standing judgment today should be judged favorably. And he didn't daven. As soon as he was informed that he was the Kohen Gadol, he should have davened for this. He didn't daven, and because of that, he's semi-responsible. Again, the commentaries have a difficult time understanding this. Why would anybody daven that a person who's obligated to receive a certain penalty shouldn't receive that penalty? Why is that something that we expect the Kohen Gadol to daven for? Should he daven that those people who don't deserve the death penalty shouldn't get the death penalty? Should he daven that those people who deserve to get lashes shouldn't get lashes? I mean, what are we expecting of him? Even if he could and was prepared to daven for such a thing, why would he? Why would he daven for the fact that a person who killed unintentionally shouldn't go to the city of refuge? And what is he even davening for? What should Bezdin say? You killed unintentionally, but you still don't go to the city of refuge? Why not? The Torah says if you kill unintentionally, you belong in the city of refuge. And the Gemara is so confident, the Gemara says he should have davened for this, and he didn't. Meaning if he would have, so then he would have been let off. And because he didn't do that, therefore the Kohen Gadol is semi-responsible. So I want to talk about this for a few minutes. What does the Gemara really mean here when the Gemara says the Kohen Gadol should have davened that the person sheyigmar dina l'schus, that Bezdin should have pasken that he's in fact innocent, because he didn't daven. What does this mean? Because there's a very beautiful insight here that should be reflected upon for a few minutes. So here it is. 3 points of introduction. Number one, not everybody who kills unintentionally goes to the city of refuge. There has to be at least an element of negligence on behalf of the unintentional murderer. There has to be some degree of negligence on his end. If it was mamash out of his control, in the words of the Gemara, if it was an oinus, or even korov le'oinus, if it was out of his control, then the person actually does not go to the city of refuge. Very briefly, I'll give you the example of the Gemara. The Gemara uses, taking from the Pasuk, the Gemara uses the example of two people who go to chop wood. And one person raises his axe to chop down a tree, and he strikes at the tree. And at some point during the striking of the tree, an accident happens. Instead of him striking the tree, he ends up killing the other person who's standing next to him, also chopping down a tree. Says the Gemara, there's two possible scenarios. One is, as he's swinging the axe, the metal piece on top of the axe detaches from the wooden handle, literally flies off its handle, strikes the person next to him, and kills him. The other option is where he strikes at the tree, and a chip of wood flies off the tree in the place where he has struck it, flies into the person who's standing next to him, Rahman al-Islan, and kills him. The Gemara says like this: if the metal piece flies off the handle as you strike, then you go to the city of refuge. Then you go to the Ir Miklat. That's something you're considered, at least there's an element of negligence involved. You should have made sure that the metal piece is properly attached to the handle before you swung. On the other hand, if you strike at the tree and then the wooden chip flies off it I got competition here. A wooden chip flies off the tree and strikes the other person, then you don't go to the city of refuge. That's considered completely beyond your control. That's considered an honest. There's no way you could have anticipated that. There's no way you could have prevented that. And so in that case, it's considered out of your control. And so even then, you wouldn't go to the city of refuge because it's considered something that there's no way you could have prevented. That's introduction number one. Introduction number two, even if he could have prevented it, the truth of the matter is it was beyond his control. He didn't do so intentionally. The Gemara says, by the way, the Gemara explains, the Torah says that this din, that the person goes to the city of refuge, only applies if it happens between two people who are not enemies. What if it happens between two people who are enemies? Then it doesn't go to the city of refuge. We're concerned that there was some intent involved, right? Even if it was an accident, but if the two people hate each other, then we're concerned that there was some intent involved. What's the definition of enemies? How do you define, the Gemara says, how do you know when two people are enemies, when they hate each other? The Gemara says that two people, you can know that two people hate each other if they don't talk to each other intentionally for 3 days. If 3 days go by and not two people intentionally don't talk to each other, not that stamazai happens that they didn't talk to each other. For 3 days, two people intentionally don't talk to each other, they're considered enemies. In that case, if one kills the other unintentionally, we say, no. We're concerned that there was a little bit of intent involved. He doesn't go to the city of refuge. In other words, he's not innocent enough. He's not worthy of the kapora of a city of refuge. The kapora of a city of refuge only works for somebody who killed unintentionally. But again, not unintentionally to the degree where it was completely out of his control. That's introduction number one. Introduction number two, even though it was done unintentionally, the Torah still considers him, the unintentional murderer, to be one who is needing kapora. He needs to be forgiven. Although the person can argue, I didn't do anything, I didn't mean anything, I didn't realize it was going to happen, I had no intent. Hakol tov v'yafeh, all's good and fine. But the bottom line is, through your actions, somebody died. There is something about what you did that needs a kapara. You can argue from today till tomorrow, I didn't intend, I didn't mean. Not good enough. Bottom line, somebody died as a result of your actions. Somebody died as a result of what you did. There's an element of responsibility here, and therefore there's an element of kapara that's involved. There's an element of kapara that is necessary on your end to gain atonement for what it is that you did. I will add here like this. I will add that this idea used to be understood as a spiritual concept. A person did something, Rahman al-San, a person killed somebody. They had no intent of killing the person. It happened by mistake. The Torah says you need a kapara anyways. This used to be understood as a spiritual concept. Until psychology, the world of psychology, gave us a doctor called Dr. Sigmund Freud. And Dr. Sigmund Freud, who maybe wasn't a very spiritual man, but a Yid nevertheless, and Dr. Sigmund Freud taught us about something called the subconscious. And psychology coined the phrase, a Freudian slip. What's a Freudian slip? A Freudian slip means if you say something by mistake, hat gesagt Dr. Freud, the Große Chacham, it's not the pshat, it's a stupid mistake. It's not the pshat, I meant to say, so-and-so, but, I really said my mother-in-law or something like that. Freud said, no. Actually, the mistake that you made, the words that you said without intending to say them, they are reflective of what you really think. That's an insight into what you really want, into what you really mean, in a way that you're either not comfortable to tell us, to tell other people, you're afraid to tell other people, or maybe you're even afraid to tell yourself. So it'll come out in the form of a Freudian slip, where you'll mean one thing and you'll say something else. Freud said, this is a window, this is an insight into what's really going on behind closed doors. Don't tell me it happened by mistake. You're telling the truth, it did happen by mistake. But don't tell me that because it happened by mistake, therefore it has no connection to you. Nah. You said it by mistake. It's even more of an insight into what you really think than the things you say on purpose. Why? Because the things you say on purpose, you say them only because you decided to say so. So right now, for whatever reason, you made the decision to say X. So you decided to say it. But the things that you said without intending to say, the mistake tells us about the truth of what's really going on. You want to know the truth about what somebody thinks? Listen to what they're saying when they're not on guard, not when they're on guard. When they're on guard, everybody can give fancy speeches. When you catch them off guard for a second, then you can get the truth. Freudian slip gives us more of an insight into the person than anything else. In a spiritual sense, this is perhaps related to the idea that for an unintentional murder, for an aveira by mistake, the person also needs a kapara. We say, of course you did it by mistake. Of course you didn't intend to do it. But you see, Freud said, if you had no issues with your mother-in-law, you wouldn't have said her name by mistake. So if you were truly not connected to the realm, to the sin of murder, if you were truly as you should be spiritually, this mistake, this aveira would not have even happened to you by mistake. It would have never happened at all. And for this reason, the Gemara says, tzaddikim, even by mistake, they don't sin. A tzaddik by mistake will not sin. The question is, what do you mean a tzaddik won't sin? How can you control what you're going to do by mistake? The answer is, you can't control what you're going to do by mistake. That's the whole point. So yes, a tzaddik can hold himself back from not sinning intentionally, yes. But if he does so long enough and Itaka becomes a tzaddik, once he's elevated to that level, if he's clean on the inside, then even unintentionally, he won't come to sin. That's introduction number 2. Introduction number 3. The way we perceive people, the way people are viewed by others, has a tremendous impact on who they become and how they develop. When a person is viewed by others as an irresponsible, when a person is viewed by others as an inferior quality human being, often just being the subject, just being the object of that type of a perspective, fosters within the person this type of negativity. And lahavdil, in a positive sense, when we have a good perspective on somebody, this actually develops and brings out the goodness within them. And for this reason, it is incredibly important to always make sure that one hangs around, one spends time with people who are positive people. It's incredibly important to hang out with people who see you in a positive light. There is a piece of wisdom out there that says, I don't know if I'm quoting it exactly or just approximately, but the general idea is that a person becomes the average of the 5 people he hangs around with the most. The person you spend, the 5 people that you spend the most amount of time with, you sort of level out somewhere, you become sort of the average between those 5 people. In a spiritual sense, the meaning of this is that it's always incredibly important to be in the presence of people who see you in a positive light, or even better, I would say, who see the positive in you. And if you're spending time with somebody who sees the negativity in you, if you're spending time with somebody who sees in you bad qualities, then just being in that person's presence and being objectified, so to speak, by that type of a perspective on a consistent basis will actually bring you down. It will wear you down and weaken your quality as a human being. Those are the three introductions. Okay, now let's try to explain this piece of Gemara. There's something unique, our rabbis, uniquely difficult, or there's something uniquely painful about the consequence of Ir Miklat. Because think about what we're telling a person. We're telling a person, you have a life, you have a family, you have a mission in this world, you have an influence on society, you're doing something, you're living a life with all that it entails. But now that you've done X, Y, Z, now that you've encountered such and such a thing, you must put your entire life on hold. You must move into the city of refuge, you must move into the Ir Miklat, and you must stay there for an unspecified amount of time until the death of the Kohen Gadol, which we have no idea how long that is. You have to stay there until then. For all practical purposes, we're telling this person, your kapora, your purification is such that everything that goes on in your life needs to be put on hold for an unspecified amount of time. That's what the Torah says. In a sense, our rabbis explain, this is even worse than death. In a sense, this is worse than death. The term the Gemara uses for a person sentenced in Ir Miklat is golus, is exile, which in a sense is worse than death. At least in the case where a person is sentenced to death from a spiritual perspective, we're telling the person, your mission, your sentence, your life in this world has come to an end. Because of what you did prematurely or whatever it is, it's over. It's time to move on. The neshama will go back up. Maybe in order to fix what the neshama did, the neshama must come back down into this world for another round. Be it as it may, the neshama will travel its own course. Be it as it may, whatever needs to happen will happen. But for what was until now is over, something else begins. With capital punishment, at least there's a sense of clarity. One chapter ends, another chapter begins. With golus, with Ir Miklat, we're basically just telling the person, we don't know what to do with you. It's not bad enough that we need to kill you, but it's not good enough that we can send you back into regular life. You cannot continue to function as a human being the way you have until now. We can't kill you either. It's like this sort of no man's land. We're going to send you into the Ir Miklat, where you're going to live there until the death of the Kohen Gadol. We're talking about a bezdin, we're talking about a court who looks at an individual and sees no value in this person's life, sees no merit to it. We're just going to freeze your existence. We're going to put you in the city of refuge and we're going to give you what you need to live, but you're going to stay there until the Kohen Gadol dies, and then you'll go back to living a normal life and continue living. We're sending you into exile. Go. We don't know if it's for a day, for a year, for 10 years, or for the rest of your life. Your kapora is such that it requires us to put you in a freezer and stay there until something happens and we're ready to let you go. What we're basically doing is we're basically taking a yid and we're giving a psak din that his life has to be put on hold until God knows what, until God knows when. It's important to understand that this is a particularly harsh sentence. The burden of having nothing to carry, the burden, the pain of having nothing to live for and nothing to do, nothing to accomplish, to have everything in your life stripped away from you and just remain a shell of your former existence where you're staying alive practically, but you can't continue to live and do any of those things that you lived for and you've done until now, is in a sense even worse than death, because the person now finds themselves bored. An empty life can be, in a way, even more painful than no life at all. Lo yolenu, I mean, we need look no further, but lo yolenu, when human beings are bored, when human beings don't have something to wake up for, when they don't have something to accomplish, when there isn't something for them to do, they often degrade into very damaging lifestyles for themselves. They often hurt themselves in one form or another. They can find themselves involved in addiction and in all sorts of terrible habits because there's nothing to live for. There's nothing for them to live for. It's a worthwhile thing to remember. A little off the record, but I remember once complaining to somebody that I felt overwhelmed by all the things that were constantly pulling on me and pulling on me and pulling on me. And I was complaining. Like, I feel like it's too much. I feel like I'm overwhelmed. I feel like I have to deal with too much. And it's just like nonstop, I'm tired and it never ends. And there's always more and more and more. It doesn't take much for a Jew to complain. I complained. I'll never forget his answer because it was very wise. He said to me, one day you're going to miss this. I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, one day you'll wake up in the morning and nobody will be pulling on you. Please God, after 120. Nobody will, you won't feel needed. You won't feel relevant. You won't feel like there's a mission. You won't wake up with a sense of urgency. And you'll miss this. We often forget this, when we sometimes look at our lives and feel like we can't, we deal with all the stuff we have to do and it's overwhelming. Believe it or not, the alternative of having nothing to do or not enough to do, the alternative of not having something to live for, the alternative of not having people need you and pull on you, is a very, very painful place to live. The day a Bezdin sentences a person to live in the Ir Miklat and tell him, right, get out, go to the city of refuge. That's the day the Bezdin looks at an individual, at a Jew, and says to them, we have nothing to do with you. Society has no place for you. We're going to lock you up. We're going to put you in jail in the city of refuge, and you'll stay there until the death of the Kohen Gadol. Now, I'm not a politician, but I don't think it takes a politician to understand that the prison system that we have in today's day and age, in many cases, has this exact problem, where they take individuals, many of whom are very dangerous to society. And what they do is they lock them up in prison for X amount of time. And then amazingly, when they come out after their sentence, however long it is, we make the discovery that they're even more of a danger to society than they were before. They haven't been rehabilitated, unfortunately. They haven't been rehabilitated in prison. They've only become worse. Now, and you wonder to yourself, well, didn't the person learn from prison is Rahman al-Islam, is a terrible, terrible thing for a person. Didn't the person learn from what they did? For God's sake, you want to go back? And part of the dysfunction of the system is that the prison experience itself brings out the worst within the person, because they wake up every day with unfortunately, in many cases, with no real rehabilitation, with nothing to live for, with no sense of drive, with no sense of purpose, they're just locked up. So they've been stripped of their dignity as a human being, and they're just existing there. That's why, by the way, as a rule in Torah, with some exception, but as a rule, the Torah doesn't speak about a consequence of prison. There's capital punishment, there's lashes, there's financial consequences, there's all sorts of things. But prison, as a consequence in its own right, no such thing. The only exception, or form of an exception, is Ir Miklat, where the Torah looks at a Yid, where the Bezdin looks at a Yid and says, you, go to the city of refuge and stay there till the death of the Kohen Gadol. Says the Gemara, the Kohen Gadol should have davened that the Bezdin should have ruled that this person should not go to the city of refuge. The Kohen Gadol should have davened that no Bezdin should ever sentence a Jew to live in the city of refuge. What should they have sentenced the Jew with? Either that he's innocent or that he's guilty, but not left him stuck in no man's land. They should have not let him be stuck there in this twilight zone where he has to stay in the city of refuge for an undeserving amount, for an unknown amount of time. If the Kohen Gadol would have been worthy, would have done his job as a true Kohen Gadol, if he would have done it right and if he would have done it properly, he would have davened to the Rabbeinu Shalom that when Bezdin sees this Jew standing in front of them, they would see a Jew who has some purpose in life, who can accomplish something, who can do, whose destiny should not be to just ship him off, put him in a freezer, and wait to see what happens. He should have davened to Hashem and said, Hashem, even a Jew who, Rahman al-Islam, committed a terrible crime like this, even he, so long as he is alive, has a purpose. There's a reason for which Hashem kept him here. If he deserves capital punishment, let it be capital punishment. But if he doesn't deserve capital punishment, and if he deserves to live, there's a reason why he needs to remain alive. V'loi bikesh. The Kohen Gadol didn't daven for that. Says the Gemara, even if he wasn't the Kohen Gadol, at the time that this unintentional murder happened, he bears some of the responsibility. We turn to the Kohen Gadol and we say, on your watch, Bezdin found a Jew for whom they saw no purpose in him living. They found a Jew who did a crime, and they found no purpose for him to remain in society. Not to live, not to die, just to stay in the middle, and they sent him off. They sent him off to the city of refuge. What do we want from the Bezdin? What did the Bezdin do wrong? Nothing. The Bezdin didn't do anything wrong. What do we want from the Kohen Gadol? We say the Kohen Gadol should have davened. What would have happened if the Kohen Gadol would have davened? If the Kohen Gadol would have davened, then everybody who is within the vicinity of the Kohen Gadol, all the people of his generation, would have been able to exercise the value of their existence, would have been able to contribute something to society in one form or another. And even Bezdin would find a way, to take this person and find a zchus in him, find a merit in him, that he should be able to continue living in society. Perhaps he needs to be disciplined. Perhaps he needs to be monitored. Perhaps he needs to be set up, be it as it may. Perhaps he needs to be rehabilitated. Give him whatever it is that he needs, and then put him back in society and let him contribute what it is that he can contribute. See, it's like this. The Torah doesn't really, truly, ultimately believe that anything exists without a purpose. The Torah doesn't ultimately believe that any person's life is a waste. Doesn't believe that any part of a person's life is a waste. Doesn't believe that any moment in a person's life, not even a second. If Hashem has given me a day, there's something to do with it. It's not just to sit in the Ir Miklat and wait until something happens. In this case, we're dealing with a person who committed a sin. This reality in the person may be difficult to see. Bezdin may look at him and not see that. Or Bezdin may look at him and see that. It's the Kohen Gadol's job, the one whose job it is to light the menorah of every single Jew's neshama. It's the Kohen Gadol's job to make sure that the potential within every single Jew is seen. And then the Gemara says something even more powerful than that. the Gemara says with confidence, you know why this Jew ended up in the Ir Miklat? V'loi bikesh. Because the Gemara states with confidence, the Kohen Gadol didn't daven for him. That's why he ended up in the city of refuge. Here, it's the Kohen Gadol's feet that we hold to the fire. We turn to the Kohen Gadol and we say to him, where were you? Where were you to daven? To reach out, to find a way to ignite the soul of every single person so that they can feel that there is a purpose for their existence. You know why Bezdin didn't see a purpose in this person's life? Because he didn't see a purpose in his own life. And you know why he didn't see a purpose in his own life? Because the Kohen Gadol didn't do his job. What's the job of the Kohen Gadol? To elevate every single Yid and see in them a purpose, see in them a mission, see in them a reason why Hashem put them here and keeps them here. The Kohen Gadol is in a sense responsible. So long as God shall help me, I shall never forget the day I heard this word. A teacher walks into a classroom and says, children, what is the greatest moment in Jewish history? The most pivotal, changing moment in Jewish history. What is it? And all the little boys and girls are jumping out of their chairs with their hands in the air. Everybody wants to be called, and the teacher says, well, go around the classroom, let everybody say. And the first one goes, Yetzias Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsuf, Matan Torah, Beis HaMikdash, Mishkan, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Rambam, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Akiva Eger, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the writing of the Mishnah, the writing of the Gemara, And the teacher listens and listens and listens, not happy with any of their answers. These are all great moments, the teacher tells the students in Jewish history. They're all fantastic. It's Yetzias Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsuf, the miracles Hashem did, unbelievable. But they're not the greatest moments of Jewish history. All right, class is lost. All right, teacher. What is it? What is the greatest moment in all of Jewish history? And the teacher says, simple. Right now. Today. Thursday. The very moment my phone rang. Thursday, the 24th of Tammuz, July the 16th, at 11:55 a.m. Los Angeles time. This is the most critical, crucial moment in Jewish history. Everything that happened until now is just a lead up. Class is confused. A lead up to what? What's supposed to happen now? Says the teacher. There's the point. Now it's your turn. Now you do something. Now you make your contribution. Now you ask yourself the question, the only question that a person ever has to ask themselves, which is, why did Hashem put me here? Why did Hashem give me life? There's obviously a reason. Nothing is intended to be wasted. Definitely not the most precious creation of all of existence, time and life. There's a reason why Hashem made me. What is that purpose? The Kohen Gadol's job is to make sure that every single Jew lives with that reality burning in their veins every moment. You know, the Baal Shem Tov says very famously that after 120, when it comes the ultimate Yom Hadin, when it comes the ultimate day of judgment, the Baal Shem Tov says, the heavenly court doesn't judge the neshama. Instead, the heavenly court turns to the neshama and says to the neshama, we'd like to get your advice, we'd like to get your opinion on someone else's life. And they show the neshama the story of its own life, without the neshama realizing that it's watching its own life story. And when it's all over, they say to the neshama, Nu, what do you think? The neshama will go, amazing. This person deserves to go to Gan Eden. And they say to the neshama, okay, that was you. Now you go to Gan Eden. Or the neshama goes, not impressed. Looks like this neshama could use a little bit of cleansing. Send him down to the barbecue. Okay, they say to the neshama, this is you. You need a little cleansing. The neshama, the judgment of the neshama, then the judgment on the soul, explains the Baal Shem Tov, doesn't come from anybody else. It comes from within the person himself. A person, my dear friends, has committed a crime. He's committed an aveira. He stands before the Bezdin. The Bezdin is going to determine, what is the story with this guy? What's going to be the story of the rest of his life? He's committed a sin, yes. Does he have something now to live for? Does he have something now to do with his life? Is there a way for him to fix this? Or is his destiny to just sit there, wrapped, marinating in his own guilt, thinking about nothing else other than what he's done, the terrible accident that happened, and he doesn't move on? Says the Gemara, you were Kohen Gadol when this judgment happened. What the Bezdin will rule on the neshama, what the Bezdin will rule on the soul, is a product of the way the soul sees itself. The Kohen Gadol should have davened with everything that he has, that the neshama should see virtue and purpose in itself, that the neshama should see holiness and a purpose in life in itself. And if it had seen itself that way, then the Bezdin would have seen it that way too. Instead, a soul looked at itself, wrapped in Jewish guilt, said, I'm done for. I see no value in this. The person gave up on themselves. Then and only then did the Bezdin send him to the city of refuge for an unknown amount of time. The Gemara says, you're the Kohen Gadol. You are responsible. He'll stay there until the death of the Kohen Gadol, who didn't do enough and didn't see enough to bring out the potential within this person's neshama. I think there are two very important lessons to learn from this. Number one is the never-ending lesson of the Torah, which is that every day and every moment and every hour of life is given to us by Hashem as a gift. The most precious thing that we squander is time. Hashem has given it to us. It is to be treasured like nothing else. Time, the world likes to say, time is money. What a load of nonsense. Time is infinitely more valuable than money. Infinitely more valuable. Every moment is given to us by Hashem for a purpose. Do something with it. Even if Rahman al-Itzlan, a person looks at himself and says, me, I'm a terrible human being. Do you know what I did? Do you know what I did yesterday? Because of me, you know what happened? Somebody, Rahman al-Itzlan, is dead. Yes. But if Hashem has chosen to keep us alive and given us one more day or one more hour or one more year or whatever it is, then there's more to do rather than sit and stare into the rear view mirror of my life and say, oi, yesterday I made a terrible mistake. What if you're right? What if you did make a terrible mistake yesterday? So what? Therefore, today is meaningless. Therefore, there's nothing to do with today. Therefore, you should sit and cry over what happened yesterday. What will that accomplish? What will it do if you sit and cry over yesterday? Nothing. So then Hashem has given us a day to do something with it, no matter what has happened in the past. And the second, of course, most incredibly powerful lesson from this is the importance of leadership. The Kohen Gadol is a leader. The Torah says, you're the leader. It's your job to help, to inspire, to show every single person within your leadership the value of their existence, what it is that they're supposed to live for. You got to light a fire under everybody's chair. They need to wake up and get out of bed in the morning with a bounce in their step. There's something that they can do that nobody else can do. There's something that can be done today that has never been done before. This is a moment that all of Jewish history has been waiting for. And our decisions here and now will determine that. A good Jewish leader, a Jewish leader who's worthy of being a real Kohen Gadol, is one who can get everybody to see within themselves the contribution that they can make in the greatest moment of all of Jewish history, which is the here and the now. May Hashem help us that we learn from this lesson of the individual who, notwithstanding his sins of the past, is instructed by the Torah to continue living and to continue searching for the purpose, the reason for which Hashem has given him life. Continue to search for where it is that he or she can make a difference and learn the lesson of leadership, true leadership, which is always the litmus test of true leadership, which is that it's never about you, the leader. It's always about the leader being able to show others the greatness that they have within themselves, and how everything, all of Jewish history that happened until now, was all a lead up, was all a build up. Hashem prepared all of this for us. What we do now determines the course of the rest of Jewish history. Have a wonderful